The year is 64 AD. Rome, the magnificent, chaotic heart of the known world, is burning. A merciless firestorm born in the city's merchant district is consuming everything in its path. For 6 days and 7 nights, the inferno rages, turning entire districts of wooden tenements into ash and even devouring the marble temples of the gods. The city is a vision of hell on earth. According to the historian Cassius Dio, as his city burned, the Emperor Nero ascended to his palace roof. He put on the robes of a tragic actor, picked up his lyre and began to sing. He sang a song about the fall of ancient Troy, comparing the destruction of his own capital to the epic tragedy of the past. He was not a leader in mourning, he was an artist, finding a perverse and terrible inspiration in the apocalypse he had unleashed upon his own people. This is the enduring image of the Great Fire of Rome, the story of a mad, narcissistic tyrant who fiddled while his city burned. It is one of the most powerful and damning portraits of villainy in human history. But is it the truth, or is this iconic legend one of the most successful and cynical character assassinations ever recorded, a lie crafted to conceal a far more complicated and sinister reality? To understand the fire, you must first understand the city it consumed. The Rome of 64 AD was not the city of marble and monuments we often imagine. It was a chaotic, sprawling and dangerously overcrowded metropolis. Over 1 million people were packed into its 7 hills, a combustible mix of unimaginable wealth and desperate poverty. The rich lived in opulent stone villas, but the vast majority of the population was crammed into insulae, tall, poorly constructed wooden apartment blocks that towered over a labyrinth of narrow, winding streets. This city of wood was a tinderbox. Fires were a constant and terrifying feature of daily life, but they were usually contained. The Great Fire was different, and at the center of this volatile city sat its equally volatile emperor, Nero Claudius Caesar. Nero was a man of immense contradictions. He came to power as a young popular ruler, a lover of the arts, poetry, and music. He was an avid performer and a patron of grand public spectacles and games. But beneath the populist charm lay a deeply insecure egomaniac capable of shocking cruelty. He had murdered his own controlling mother, Agrippina, and his first wife, Octavia, to consolidate his power. He also had a grand ambition: to rebuild Rome in his own glorious image, to rename it Neropolis. He was frustrated by the city's chaotic layout and the Senate's refusal to fund his grandiose architectural dreams. He was an emperor with the vision of an artist and the paranoia of a tyrant, ruling over a city that was, quite literally, waiting for a spark. That spark came on the night of July 18th, 64 AD. The fire began in the merchant shops and stalls that lined the southeastern end of the Circus Maximus, Rome's colossal chariot racing stadium. In this densely packed area, filled with flammable goods like oil and textiles, a simple cooking fire or an overturned lamp was all it took. Fanned by a strong summer wind, the flames quickly leaped into the wooden structure of the circus itself, and then into the surrounding residential districts. The fire became an unstoppable inferno. The narrow, winding streets acted like funnels, creating wind tunnels that drove the flames forward. The wooden insulae exploded into fireballs, collapsing and trapping thousands inside. The Roman historian Tacitus, our most reliable and detailed source for the event, describes a scene of absolute chaos. The shrieks of terrified women, the feeble old and the helpless young people stampeding in the streets, and a hopeless, helpless confusion. The fire burned for 6 straight days. It would subside, and then, in a different part of the city, inexplicably reignite, burning for another 3. When it was finally over, a staggering 70% of Rome was in ruins. Of the city's 14 districts, only 4 were untouched. 3 were leveled to the ground. 7 were left as a smoking wasteland of charred rubble. But this is where the popular legend and the historical record violently diverge. According to Tacitus, Nero was not in Rome when the fire broke out. He was at his seaside villa in Antium, 35 miles away. When news of the disaster reached him, he did not pick up his lyre. He raced back to his burning capital, and his initial response was not that of a madman, but of a surprisingly effective leader. Tacitus writes that Nero moved with decisive speed. He personally directed firefighting efforts. He opened his own private gardens and even public buildings like the Pantheon to shelter the hundreds of thousands of newly homeless citizens. He requisitioned emergency food supplies from the surrounding countryside and sold them at a reduced price to prevent famine. By this account, Nero was not the villain of the story. He was a competent crisis manager. So why did history remember him as an arsonist? Because of what he did next. As the embers cooled, the rumors began. Despite his relief efforts, the people of Rome, homeless and grieving, needed someone to blame. The sheer scale of the destruction felt deliberate. Rumors flew that Nero's own men had been seen setting new fires, preventing people from fighting the blaze. And the emperor's next move seemed to be the ultimate confession. In the vast incinerated wasteland that the fire had cleared in the very heart of the city, Nero began construction on his masterpiece. A new palace so vast and opulent, it defied belief. He called it the Domus Aurea, the Golden House. It was not a single building, but a 300-acre palace complex. It featured a 300-room villa with dining rooms that had revolving ceilings that showered guests with flowers and perfume. Its walls were adorned with gold leaf, precious gems and ivory. In the courtyard stood a 120-foot-tall bronze statue of himself, the Colossus Neronis. The grounds contained an enormous artificial lake on the very spot where the Colosseum would later be built, surrounded by pastures, vineyards, and forests filled with wild animals. To the people of Rome, this was the ultimate proof of his guilt. The motive was now clear. He hadn't just benefited from the fire, he had orchestrated it. He had incinerated the homes of his people to build his own personal pleasure dome. The whispers against him grew into a roar of condemnation. Nero's popularity plummeted. He was losing control of the narrative, and he knew he needed a scapegoat. He found one in a small, secretive, and widely despised religious sect, the Christians. At this time, the Christians in Rome were a tiny minority and deeply misunderstood. Roman society viewed them with intense suspicion. They were accused of atheism for refusing to worship the Roman gods and the emperor. Their secret meetings led to rumors of incest and cannibalism, a gross misinterpretation of the Eucharist and their custom of calling each other brother and sister. They were, in the words of Tacitus, a group hated for their abominations. They were the perfect target, outsiders with no political power, whom the public already distrusted. Nero seized his opportunity with monstrous cynicism. Tacitus writes, "To get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians." The persecution was a masterclass in sadistic public spectacle. Nero had the Christians arrested. They were tortured into confessions which were then used to round up hundreds more. Their executions were designed for maximum horror, a form of public entertainment. Some were dressed in animal skins and torn apart by dogs in the arena. Others were crucified. But Nero's most infamous cruelty was reserved for his own garden parties. He had Christians coated in pitch, nailed to crosses or posts, and set ablaze, using them as living human torches to illuminate his evening festivities. This was the first great state-sponsored persecution of the Christian faith. It was an act of pure political deflection, a lie built upon a tragedy that would set the stage for centuries of conflict and create the first martyrs of a religion that would one day conquer the empire that tried to destroy it. So did Nero start the fire. The final verdict of history, guided by the account of Tacitus, is that he was almost certainly innocent of the charge of arson. The fire was an accident, a tragic inevitability in a city built to burn, but his actions after the fire made him morally culpable for the disaster's worst legacy. He saw the ashes of his city not as a tragedy to be mourned, but as a real estate opportunity to be exploited. And when the political cost of his ambition became too high, he fed an innocent minority to the wolves to save himself. There were, in effect, two great fires of Rome. The first was the physical fire of wood and stone that destroyed a city. The second was the political fire of persecution and cynicism that Nero ignited. That second fire would smolder for the next 2.5 centuries, shaping the brutal relationship between the Roman state and the growing Christian faith. So why does the simple, powerful legend of Nero fiddling while Rome burned persist, even when the historical record tells a more complicated story? Because even if it is not literally true, it contains a deeper, poetic truth about the man himself. It perfectly captures the essence of a decadent, self-absorbed tyrant, an artist so consumed by his own ego that the suffering of his people becomes mere background music for his own drama. The Great Fire of Rome was a pivotal moment in Western history. It didn't just level a city, it created a narrative that would echo for millennia. It turned a narcissistic emperor into the Antichrist and a persecuted sect into a faith of martyrs, and it serves as a terrifying, timeless warning that in the aftermath of any great disaster, the cynical search for someone to blame can be far more destructive than the disaster itself.